Yeah, this is the way. This is the future.
We can tell jokes, become comedians.
Become. We already are.
All right. Sorry we're starting a little late. We're gonna just dive right in. We got John Lanferman and Dave Holden with us. They're together in the same room, so who knows what's gonna happen.
It froze. Guys are joining up.
Dave,
John.
especially for us to just go through and just
What's going on? No,
You just stopped.
you froze.
Dave, can you hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you. I can hear you guys just fine.
All right, Dave, tell us who you are, where you're from.
Name's Dave Hoyt, lead pastor at Prairie Avenue Christian Center in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, in God's country. Can you hear me all right there, Dave Holden? You look like you can't hear me.
No, I'm just concentrating.
You were just captivated. It's the beard.
Oh.
It's the beard.
All right, Visalia, unmute and go.
Hey, it's Eric Riley here. I'm going to try to wrangle in a couple other guys. I'm the communications director at Radiant Church, and Travis, our lead pastor, is out there with you guys right now, so he should be on this call, hopefully. But, yeah, we're excited to be a part of this.
Great.
All right, John.
I'm here for you, Eric. Here.
John in Nashville, can you unmute your mic and talk to us?
I think I'm on you.
This time you just push a button.
I'm there.
Yay.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, John.
Yeah, happy to be here. Or there. Or wherever I am.
Good to see you.
Great.
And then is that John Britt? I think John in Washington.
Yeah, it is.
It is, but maybe he froze.
We ain't moving.
All right. Well, John, you missed your turn, so you're just going to have to listen. All right, I'm going to turn it over to these guys to share with us, and then for 15 or 20 minutes, then we'll have some Q&A. So Dave Holden and John Lanferman, take it away.
Okay. John and I thought it would be good to talk with, as we're both together, and the subject to discuss will be the journey of Newfrontiers. Not to go into too much detail of the past, but actually where we're at the moment in terms of being a global movement. And so I would like to give a quick synopsis of how I view what's happened in Newfrontiers from an international perspective. Then I'll ask John to come and chip in with everything else that he wants to say about this particular topic. As you all know, Newfrontiers has gone through a tremendous change. I've had the privilege of being involved in it before it even existed. So I'm so old now that I can even remember when it began, 36, 37 years ago, when we were just a handful of churches in the southeast of England. First of all, I'd like to say this. Newfrontiers existed to preach the gospel primarily through reaching nations through church planting. That was always why we existed. We are a family of churches, and we are also lots of other things, but that was always the goal of what we were called to do. And I think it's important to remember that, because I think if you don't understand that, then you don't understand why we transitioned as we did a few years ago now. And the reason that we primarily transitioned was because of the gospel. It wasn't just an organizational issue. It wasn't just Terry Virgo is not going to be around forever. Those are not incidental issues, but the real issue is for the sake of the gospel. We simply came to a place where we felt that in order for us to keep preaching the gospel, planting churches, reaching more and more nations, we could do that effectively if we kept the same structure that we had up until that moment. It had become a vehicle for all we've done over the last 30 years, but could not stay the vehicle we wanted to do to reach more nations and preach the gospel to more people. So that, for me, is always a crucial thing, because most people get all caught up in the details of why did Newfrontiers do this and how's it working. Those are the questions everybody wants to ask, but they forget the real issue was because we've always been called to play our part in reaching the nations of the world. So for me, this has been a wonderful transition. They're still not out of all of them at the moment, but as I travel around, my experience is this, that Newfrontiers, which was one apostolic team led by one guy, is now a multiple number of apostolic teams. That is how I define Newfrontiers, and we're held together relationally and not organizationally. And all of us are now beginning to plant more churches, preach the gospel to more people, and now we're reaching more and more new nations. So in the sphere of churches that I'm working with right now, I'm particularly working into Europe, and even in the last 2 or 3 months I've been involved in planting a church in Rome, in Brussels, and in Geneva. And they were 3 places I never could get to in the old days because I was caught up in too many other organizational things. And now for me and the family that I'm involved in, we now really are back on course, planting more churches and reaching new people, which is so very exciting. So I'm really positive about the journey that Newfrontiers has been through. I'm really positive about our relationships. And just to let you know, John and I are part of a team of guys that meet from around the nations. There's 6 of us. Dave Devonish, who many of you will know, leads that team. And we're just like a team of guys that facilitate those events when we all come together as a network of churches. And we plan over the next 2 or 3 years to have various kinds of gatherings of team leaders. Sometimes teams will come together, maybe even broader than that. But we're holding together and we're working together across the globe. And I'm thrilled, as I'm here in the United States, to know that the USA is playing its part and wants to be part of the global movement of churches. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to John and see if he's got any pearls of wisdom, which he always does have, to add, or correct anything I've said which is wrong.
No, Dave, I think you said it very well. One of the things that I think has been quite impressive is to note that though when you go through any transitions, there's always things to work through, and there's a few bumps in the road. Well, that's the case if you're cruising along anyway. But the fact is there's been an acceleration of mission and church planting. It seems that all the things that have happened to us in Newfrontiers since our very beginnings has been inspired prophetically, which we've weighed and determined that this is the direction God's given us. And you do have the church that's built upon this foundation of prophets and apostles. Prophets and prophecy comes with revelation. Apostles taking that, all right, let's go with that, let's build on that. And so we've extended from a small little house church movement in the south of England throughout more than 50 nations now, and many hundreds of churches, at least 1,000. And sometimes it's difficult to keep track of that, but it's accelerating. One of our friends, Edward Brea in Kenya, every time I see him, I say, Edward, how many churches now? and it's just amazing the acceleration. Like last time I talked, we're up to 300 churches we planted now in Kenya and beyond. So every time we've made a move and a transition which has been prophetically inspired, and oftentimes those decisions were brought into questions by people outside of us because it seemed foolish. For instance, when we stopped doing Stoneleigh, which was gathering 25,000 or so Christians, the largest Christian gathering in Europe, and we stopped it. And people, how can you stop something that's so amazing and so successful? Well, because God told us to. And each time we would make a transition like that as a result of what we felt God was calling us to do, even though the evidence seemed to declare this is very fruitful, why are you stopping? God's multiplied the fruit. And this transition we're going through at this particular point, I'm seeing the same thing happen. Multiplication of churches, multiplication of leaders, multiplication of team members and apostolic teams and church plants. And while we don't know the future where this is all going to go, it does bear witness to this one fact, that we are people of the Spirit who want to hear God. God speaks, and we want to act on that, on the pure evidence of what we know God is saying to us, and with that, we always will be fruitful. So there you have it.
Great.
I'm happy to hear your questions.
Maybe I just say one more thing while you're thinking of questions to ask. There are many movements around the world that are coming to a place where they need to go through the process of succession. And in Newfrontiers, we've obviously taken a different journey to many people, which is classically that the guy who's led a movement hands over to one other person. And I've seen that and watched that around the world as one of the models. I'm so far really happy that we didn't do that, because I think there always is the danger of institutionalization when you do something like that. Also, the guys that related to the first guy who led it may not know how they're going to relate to the new guy, and you get into problems. Whereas the way we've done it has been releasing and freeing, and certainly from my perspective, the guys that are working with me feel a greater ownership, they feel more responsibility, and it's a very relationally based thing. So the challenge is, you know, there's no headquarters, and people like to know the definition of everything. It's really hard to define something that's relational and
Yes.
organizational.
Yes.
But, you know, as long as we know what we're doing, then I think we're fine. And we just have to try and explain it to as many people as we can.
Yes.
And there are movements around the world that are looking at what Newfrontiers has done, because they've come to the same position, really. And they're saying to me, we're watching you with great interest, because it could be that we could do something similar to you. So they're saying, don't you guys mess up, because if you do, then we haven't got any other models to look at. There you go.
I think the thing that holds us together, and that's even stronger than organizational structure, is our relational connection and the commonality of values and vision. And as long as we maintain the same values and vision and maintain our relationships, I don't see why we can't continue to expand and go in together. All right, ready for questions?
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll get it started here because we've been there's a lot of us in this room. Can you hear us all right? Thumbs up. John, Dave.
Yes.
John, you can hear it.
You're in the room next door. We can't hear you.
As the multiple spheres, what there could be some bigness that is lost. Being a part of something massive around the world. You guys have any thoughts of how we, all these spheres, people that are in local churches, how they can still feel like they're a part of this worldwide movement, even though they might be relating to John or Dave or PJ?
Yeah, I think the fact is that really hasn't changed because we're still together. We who lead families of churches, we meet, we talk. Many of us are in direct connection and relationship with each other. The definition has changed. The name hasn't. We are New Frontiers. We are a family of churches working together on worldwide mission. The difference is now that New Frontiers is defined as a group of apostles working together on mission, connected in relationship, which means that affects all of our church. Because basically, when you boil it down, all you really have anyway, you can have an organization, piece of paper, or a title, but it's somewhat artificial. What you really have at the end of the day is a strong relational connection around a mission together. And we still have that. And we still own what each other's doing.
I think it's honestly quite difficult for people in a local church to be able to identify with everything that everybody's doing. But I think at a leadership level, we really can. And I think it's good for local pastors, wherever they are in the world, in New Frontiers, to just try a little bit more effort to know what's going on around the world by communication. And if I'm planting a church in Belgium, for example, and I send out the call that we're all going to Brussels to plant a church, it just could be that right across the New Frontiers family, there could be people in our churches who go there for business or go there because they feel God's calling them to Europe. And wouldn't that be wonderful if an international family were to form a team that planted a church together in another nation?
Yes.
So it's not just information, it's using opportunities when they arise to really be a family of churches together.
Actually, we're finding something like that quite practically as we prepare to move into New York.
Mm-hmm.
We've had leaders from New Frontiers churches across the nations inquire as to how they can be engaged in that with us as well.
Yeah.
So I think we've still got things to work out in that area, but I think we're feeling our way through because we have a desire to work together to reach the nations.
Great. Thanks, guys. Hey, Dave in Coeur d'Alene, do you got a question? You have a pensive look on your face, so I'm hoping. And then we'll go to Eric and Visalia. And it's pretty wide open as far as topics.
So I can ask John Lanferman about his passion for a good bottle of scotch. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, passion for a good bottle of scotch. He wants to know, is that appropriate?
Well, of course.
No, the question, David, you mentioned something about this. What are some of the things that we're looking at in the future as far as gathering leaders? What are going to be some of those things that you guys are talking about that are coming down the pipeline? And maybe gathering the larger group of New Frontiers. Do you see us going back to kind of like when we did Brighton, the big Brighton conference? Do you see those things happening in the future? What do you guys? What's coming down the pipeline?
Well, the honest answer to that is we don't yet know, but I think it's kind of strange. It's a little bit like I have 4 children, and when they left home and got married and built their own families, I had to give them space. I had to give them the opportunity to find their own way in that. And there's a kind of independence that comes, but then there's an interdependence that comes because you realise you're still part of the same family and you need one another. I think we're going through a period of time when it's good for each sphere to find its own fees. Like in the USA, you have a number of gatherings, etc., etc. I think everybody's doing that. But then there comes a desire for more. There comes a desire again for international gatherings. So at the moment, each year we're planning, certainly number one of the guys who lead the activities, we will come together once a year. We're now looking at the possibility of bringing our teams together. That's another possibility. To bring everybody together in New Frontiers would be leaders right across the whole globe would now be a huge task. I think for me, working primarily in Europe, for example, I'd love to bring together all the leaders in Europe that we're working with, and there are several spheres working in Europe across Newfrontiers. I'd love us all to come together. If you're working to the Middle East, I'd love them to come together. So I think we're bite-sized chunks of what we used to be, coming together as much as possible. I think when you transition, you lose things as well as you gain things. And to be realistic, you can't change the clock back to a nostalgic memory of the Brighton conference. That's finished. It's over. And now we've got to move on. And there may be a loss in terms of, I mean, the thought of never seeing you, Dave, ever again is a heartbreaking thing for me. I'm sure we're going to bump into one another somewhere down the line.
Right.
That was a joke, by the way.
There's no nostalgia for me. I never went, so I don't even care.
Great. All right. Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Can you mute your mic?
No.
And just after you ask a question, make sure you remute your mic so we don't hear the reverb. Eric, you got a question, and then we'll go to Graham in Austin.
Yeah, I think probably for me, as we kind of continue to get more familiar with Newfrontiers and grow in our connection, I think one of the things I'm continuing to think through is how do we, at like the leader level, we're starting to feel more connected and more involved, but I think probably the people just that are in the congregation that are unfamiliar, how do we get them more informed, more connected with what's going on, and then also knowing about like those plantings of new churches and I guess like are you guys considering different ways that we might address that or approach that, or is it just based on each individual church taking that and communicating those things that are going on?
Well, as it relates to what we are in the U.S., I send out a newsletter with a great deal of regularity that explains what we're doing and what's happening. Now that goes to the primary leader, and it's basically up to him to share, and whether in a prayer meeting at a church, say, hey, we're doing this in Chicago, or we're doing this in New York. This is some news that's happening in Austin, Texas. Let's pray for them, kind of to bring the church into what we're doing together. So information is shared via various forms of communication, including the website, that particular newsletter, as well as the publication of the link when we try to include local news in that, and that's all real helpful. The other thing that's helpful, and I think one of the things you face, Eric, is you're the one church in California. Until there's a cluster of churches around you, it's more difficult to connect your people to some of the things that we're doing. But all of us has faced that here in the U.S. as we've started churches that were somewhat isolated. And Graham from Austin, Texas would be experiencing that as well. He's the lone church there in Texas. But when we get a cluster of churches together, we bring pastors together, they bring some of their key leaders together, there's prayer together, leadership quarterlies that happen in these particular regions. It's just one of the difficulties you face when you become the first church in a particular area until we're able to get more churches planted there. But there's a very real attempt to share information, and it's helpful and share it with their congregation, either through prayer meetings or various ways of which they gather their small group leaders. Hey, this is what's happening in Newfrontiers. We're dependent upon one another to actually help share the information that we are getting out.
Yeah, and it's amazing how different that can be depending on the local pastor or eldership team and their response to communicating with their local congregation. And apostolically, I think, from my point of view, I'm in the hands of local pastors as far as this is concerned. And I know in the old days we'd send out the Newfrontiers magazine, and one pastor in his church would stand up on a Sunday, hold up the magazine, talk about the articles. You really must read this article. and this is what God's doing in Pakistan right now, and let's pray next week for Pakistan. And it just lived for all the people. They couldn't wait to get the magazine. And then another pastor would say, oh, there's a box of Newfrontiers magazines at the back of the room under the table. If anyone's interested, get on the way out. Well, you can imagine the contrast in those two churches. So we're kind of in the hands of you guys, partly, to keep your ear to the ground and really, and keep feeding, particularly in prayer meetings, to people. So, you know, for example, in eastern Ukraine, Newfrontiers has 120 churches. That's news, and they're going through a terrible time, and we need to be praying for them right now. So my prayer meeting back in London, we often will pray for eastern Ukraine, because our folks have never been there, they'll never go there, they don't know the people, but they feel we're part of this family, and their prayers are going to have a fantastic result.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. Graham, down in Austin, Texas, can you unmute and then ask?
Hey guys, great to see you, John and Dave. Thank you so much. Say hi from Austin. Good to see you all today. It would one of the things that I can see as a vital building block that I need to have in place in a small and growing work down here in Austin is the issue of raising, identifying, and growing new leaders. So it'd be just great to hear you give your kind of few minutes take, both of you, on that whole thing. What are you seeing around the other churches? How are you raising and growing leaders yourselves? It would be great to get some nuggets from you on that subject.
Now, I think sometimes, Graham, it's helpful to have outside guys coming in, helping you from our team, for instance, and you mustn't hesitate to say help. And I mean, we want to make these trips, but it's helpful for you to say, this is where we're at. Can you come and help us with that? And fresh eyes and messing and being with those people will really be helpful to you.
That's a good point.
I think when I look for leaders, I look for guys who are faithful in little things. I look for guys who ask questions. So because the questions express interest, and it expressed humility and a willingness to be teachable.
Yeah,
so as I began to look for leaders, I'm looking for guys who are asking questions. I might invite guys to come and hang out with me. And if there's a desire to hang out, or sometimes guys who say, hey, can I just hang out with you sometime? Can we get together? Can we have a coffee? These are people that are coming on to you. The other thing that will happen is when you get emerging leaders, some of these guys can introduce you to other guys. So Andrew brings Peter. He says, come and see, I found the Lord. These guys came on to Jesus, asking questions. Others that Jesus actually saw, and he saw something in them. And so I think I would pray a great deal about this. I would ask God for insight. Jesus prayed all night about who his leaders would be. So I would pray. And the Bible tells us to ask the Lord of the harvest for laborers for the harvest field. So I can't overemphasize prayer. I can't overemphasize having fresh eyes to come and help you see. And then just the little things, like guys who come on to you, you invite them along with you. They're happy to do that. They want to do that. Guys who ask to come along. Guys who are faithful to do small things that you ask them to do. Men who ask questions. If they don't feel too big to do small things, they're generally pretty good candidates for leadership.
Hi, Graham. It's great to see you again. Nice to hear.
Great to see you, man.
That I can understand. I would say almost exactly the same as John. Sometimes you speak to a church leader or church planter like yourself, and the problem often that's raised is, but the problem is we just don't have any leaders. The truth is you do have them. Jesus is building his church, and so he will give to you people, even new converts, who have got the potential for leadership. And I think I am constantly encouraging leaders to stop complaining about what they've got. If these are the bricks that you've got to build the building, then they're the bricks you've got. And I would raise your level of faith. Even some of the people you've got at the moment that seem miles away from ever being leaders have got the potential to be leaders. We've got treasure in these earthen vessels. And as leaders, we need to find out what that treasure is and bring it out. And eventually, if you're intentional, I think you have to be intentional, it'll start to happen. There really is the potential in what you've got at the moment to identify them and let them live close to you. That's the other thing I would say. I think there's too much emphasis these days on thinking, I've got to get my leaders on a training course. I absolutely believe in training courses. I think they're wonderful. But you can go through a whole training course and not be a better leader. And I think you've got to twin that with people being close to you. You're modeling for them how leadership works, and they'll catch it from you and begin to do it.
I would say one more thing, Graham, in a pioneering situation is not to be afraid to go out and meet people who aren't Christians, which you're not afraid to do that, but invite them to come along with you. Jesus' first disciples that became leaders were actually people who were not believers.
That's very good.
He invited sinners to come along with him. And some of the better leaders that I've discovered, I've basically discovered out in the business world. And even just the other day, I happened to run across a guy, and I began to talk to him, and he's certainly not a believer, but he's a sharp guy. And at the end of our conversation, he's a businessman. He said to me, "Could I just come and hang out with you and see what you do?" Well, this guy's not even a believer yet, and here's a potential leader. Right. So let's not be afraid of those guys. Just because oftentimes in a pioneering situation, you can find them out there, they're not even in the church yet. They're not even in the Lord yet.
Yes, very good, John. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Great question. We'll go, Graham, if you could mute your mic again, that'd be great. And then John in Nashville, Privet, you got a question? And then we'll go over to Washington with John Britt and his crew.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hey, John. Hey, Dave.
Hi.
I was back to Newfrontiers and just kind of keeping our ear open to hear news kind of around the world. Some things, we're building relationship, starting with Steve Marks and Zim and some things like that, which has been very helpful. Question would be, how can we practically do that? I mean, we're listening, obviously, John, your input and newsletter and that kind of thing, but picking up things like the 120 churches in the Ukraine, East Ukraine, and things like that, practically on a local level, are there ways now in this transition to gather that information?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I get information, and oftentimes when I'm in leadership quarterlies or prayer meetings like that, not everyone is able to attend those. But there are people in this room now who are on this site talking to us that know an update about what's happening verbally in the Ukraine or different places. But now that you've asked the question, John, very, very helpful. If I could include more information in my newsletter to you guys, that would bring more information about what's happening in other parts of the world. We have an apostolic newsletter that goes between apostles by which they can share news. But now that I'm thinking, since you've asked the question, there's a hunger to know what's going on in other parts of the world, I ought to pull from that newsletter and include that in what I send you. Would you think it would be helpful?
Yeah, I actually would be helpful. That would be great. Also, just an idea. It's not a question, but an idea. One of the things that I think were extremely helpful was the New Frontiers videos that we would show on a kind of a yearly basis, what we're doing with the poor around the world. I wonder, just a question, it'd be a lot of work, but I wonder if there could be a video, maybe 2 minutes or a minute, from each sphere, like once a year. That would be kind of like a 15 or 12-minute video of kind of what's going on with PJ, what's going on with those guys, that we could show our churches, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not a question. That's an idea. Sorry.
Actually, a number of us have websites, and certainly on the website of the family churches I'm working with, called New Ground. Go to the New Ground website, see a video of the churches we're working into and the information we're putting out there of the number of European nations that we're working into. Then there'll be a link to Scott Marks in Zimbabwe, because we have a very close relationship with him. And I think we do need to kind of surf around a little bit, and some of that information is already there. But certainly, the idea of putting on videos that you can then show even into your local church is just a wonderful idea, because it just helps people bring this thing to life. What I'm really encouraged by your comments and what other guys are saying, hunger amongst you, to not just know what's going on in your sphere, but going on in others. This is what about how you get to a place where you suddenly realize, I really do want to know what my friends are doing. I'm not satisfied, I'm in a tribe that's part of a nation, and I want to find out what's happening right across the whole nation. And so I'm deeply encouraged by your desire to know what's happening in Ukraine or Zimbabwe or the Far East or wherever. There is a danger that we all now just stay in our little ghetto, our little clan, and if we do that, we'll be impoverished. I think we'll be missing out. And I'm really encouraged, because I think one of the dangers in the United States is you're such a big nation and there's so much going on here. It's the easiest thing in the world to forget about the rest of the world.
Yeah.
One of the hallmarks of Newfrontiers USA that could be unique is you're a family of churches that has a passion for the entire globe, and you actually love hearing about what God's doing around the world. So I think this is wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. That's excellent.
That's great. And I think we all need to get Privet's internet, because he has the clearest picture from our perspective. So good job, John. We'll get to John Britt in a minute, but there was a question tweeted in using the Leader Hangout hashtag from Matt Sweetman in Chicago that I thought would go well with that last question. Matt is asking if you guys have seen any effective ways that churches have related more internationally with one another, maybe across spheres, or have you guys seen churches relate internationally directly to one another?
Sure. Well, thing is that it's a kind of information overload, really, because I guess yes that there are people that are doing that, but I can't verify that from my own perspective. In churches that we're working with, let me give you an example. I have a church in the southeast of England that has had a real heart for Kenya. Kenya is in another sphere, but they have got guys in their church back in England who are opticians, and they connected with Edward Berea in Kenya, who wanted to set up a clinic so that they could really help people with cataracts and do simple operations and provide glasses and sunglasses and all kinds of things. The result of this is this one church in the southeast of England sends out a team twice a year for 2 months at a time, and I think the last time they went, 900 people had their eyesight either restored or improved as a result of these teams going out. And I guess that means that is absolutely an example of what you're saying. I hope and pray that's being multiplied everywhere. And no matter how big Newfrontiers gets and how little you know of things going around, there's always something somewhere. And I'm always saying to every local church, you can have a global perspective. And you can find ways, practical ways. Don't just sit around waiting for apostles to come up with all the ideas. Actually find ways yourself, and that'll make it a reality.
Good. Thanks. John, Britt, and your crew there in Washington, you guys got any questions for us?
Yeah, I was going to turn it over. Chris Brandon here at the lead altar had a good one for John and your team.
We couldn't get that.
We didn't get the question.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to Chris. He had a good question for you, John, and your team.
Hey, John, I know one of the key values and distinctives that we have as Newfrontiers family of churches is the input of the prophetic and the apostolic into the local church, and to have a good close link and relationship with that. What I was wondering is, as new churches join the Newfrontiers family here in the United States, is that close link to the apostolic and the prophetic going to be maintained, and how is that going to happen?
Get that? Get that?
No, did you?
No, we just couldn't hear him.
As churches add, as new churches come together, how will you maintain it?
No, that's probably
There's close connection. As new churches come in,
Yes.
how do you maintain that apostolic connection?
Okay. As more and more new churches come and join,
Yes.
how do you maintain it as a relational movement?
How do we maintain
How do
relationships?
you make sure that the relationships are there rather than it becoming just a big organization?
Yeah, I think, first of all, that would be a great problem to have, that more and more churches, and it gets larger and larger, but we've already experienced that in measure in other places. For instance, I think the UK is, what, 350 churches? Or 250. And you bringing people together in large gatherings, which we're already doing here in the US, and which, of course, they did in the UK as well, where people find each other, establish relationships, and get caught up together in the mission. It's the mission that establishes relationships. It's not relationships first and then the mission. People to come along with him. He always invited them into the mission, and it's through the mission that you find healthy relationships, because we're brothers together on a mission. And so, as more and more people are added into Newfrontiers, and we catch them up apostolically in the mission, we also have clusters of churches regionally where relationships are established. So, for instance, where you are there, Chris, in the Northwest, is more and more, let's just say 30 or 40 or 50 more churches got added in. Well, we gather you there in a more regional basis, and it may mean that we need to have more than one region there. We'd have 2 or 3 where maybe we could gather and have more intimate relationships in that setting. But I think our gatherings, bringing people together, would be huge in continuing to establish the relationship. And the only way we will build anyway is build relationally, which requires interaction, coming and being with, face-to-face, getting into each other's world, because we're committed to the relationships as well as the mission. So people who are interested in joining us, joining in the mission, we're going to interact and do this thing relationally. We're never going to do it institutionally. I'm not sure I completely understood your question, but hopefully I've shared some things that might be helpful. What do you think?
Yes, I think the more churches that join us, if we have relationships as a value, then you do everything you can to make sure that that value is there in reality. If you have a growing church, local church, and you want the people to relate and to be pastored, then one guy can't do it. So you break it down in order
Yes.
to have a better framework. I think that's one of the reasons that New Frontiers multiplied all over the world. We were becoming too impersonal and less relational. This has provided us with an opportunity to keep the relationship as a value. If you don't have relationship as a value, then you don't bother, and you just get big.
Yeah.
And you just don't know one another, and every now and again you get a magazine and you go and attend the conference. There's a lot of, sadly, there's a lot of movements that are like that, but I find lots of pastors who are in it are very dissatisfied. They're longing for something much more than that. And as John said, it's so right. If you have mission without relationships, then it becomes very impersonal. If you have relationships without mission, it becomes something very internalized, and that's not going to work either. So for me, relationships and mission are hand in hand, and we need both. And I think that's what happened in the New Testament, just to throw that out.
Yes.
Great. Thanks. Question for us from St. Joe. Michael.
Yeah, I do. Hey, so, hey guys, good to see you. Thanks so much. It's been helpful. So my question is, I love relaying information, about things from kind of going on other places in New Frontiers. I'm not very good at it, but I definitely want to get better at it. And at the same time, I really, we've got a lot going on here locally. But one of the things that you can kind of tell people about what's going on, or you can, and even in the midst of everything going on in a local church, I love spending time with other leaders and sort of being helpful. Like as you talk about apostolic spheres, if we talk about a family of churches, those are things I love a lot. And I guess my question is, like, what advice would you give to like a young pastor like myself who would want to help and serve kind of in keeping those relationships? I love spending time with other people, but I'm not like, hey, let me come in and tell you how to do things. It's more like I think I can play a helpful relational role. So what encouragement, does that make sense? Like, going and just spending time with other leaders. There's a lot of guys around me, Tommy, in these summits. There's other churches nearby. So what advice would you give me to kind of help? And what are some things I could do to just kind of be more connected as a young pastor, kind of getting, on my own feet and going maybe beyond just local things that are happening?
More connected translocally? So I'm trying to understand the question.
He's saying there's a lot of things going on in his local church, but he really loves the wider thing. It's a similar question we had before. So how does he, as a young pastor,
get engaged in the? Yeah, I think, Mike, you express your interest like you have now. I mean, I've had guys come to me and say, hey, look, when you're going somewhere or you're going to do something, why don't you let me know? Maybe I can come along with you. So if you're asking how you'd like to more personally connect with what's happening on a local, on a broader scale, I think you make yourself available, and you in some ways invite yourself. Hey, when you're going to go somewhere, I'd like to be a part of it. I just like to go along, and I've done that with guys. I know Brian's done that with guys. Different people who travel around done that with guys. I think in our family, the other thing is I do like to see guys travel and get to know each other and kind of peek in on different places as well. Sometimes we've had events in various. I see this a lot. We'll be doing a celebration in Oregon, or there'll be something happening in Visalia. And there'll be guys from Missouri that made the trip just to be out there, just to connect and hook up with what's going on. Same thing is happening in the Northeast. So it does mean an expenditure of your time a little bit, and sometimes some resources to connect more broadly. We lost him. Did you understand his question?
All right.
Still there?
Hello.
Hey, sorry about that. My connection wigged out there. Hey, no, that's really, really helpful, and I think that helps me because one of the things that I'm able to do is because there's some close churches, I can go visit them without a huge investment. But at the same time, it's like, it's almost like just putting that blip on. Brian would be the guy that I would spend the most, sort of say, hey, Brian, I've spent some time with these guys. No, that is helpful. I just don't want to be like bouncing around all kinds of different places and feel like, why are you there? Or why are you, what are you doing? And so, no, that's helpful input, John.
Can I add one more thing to that? I do know churches who have set aside a certain amount of money, they've budgeted it, for their elders or their lead pastor to do the very thing that you're saying. Because when their pastor goes and relates and picks up things from other places, that actually the local church is the one that benefits. Because you come back, you're not stuck in the same place all the time. And I think it's really healthy, actually, to go and see what God's doing in other places. And if you budget for this, then it's not an embarrassment because the money's there and you can use it or not use it. Can I just say this as well, as a visitor to your land, that I think that this is a bit of a challenge for when you're in the United States. So I've got guys where I live in the UK who are able to, in a few hours, be in Poland or to be in Czechoslovakia or wherever, and they're actually, I'm encouraging them, go network, find out, investigate. For you guys, that's not an easy thing to do, but maybe budgeting in so that once a year even, you could, if any of you guys want to come over to anything that I'm doing, like we have prayer days or things, you are very, very welcome. And Ian Ashby was with us back in October. He was over visiting family. We had 2 prayer days. He came and visited us. I think he enjoyed himself. We got connected with him, got to know a little bit more of what he's doing. So be creative in ways of being able to do that.
Let me give you an additional piece of information, is that one of the things that's happened now in New Frontiers is all of us that work together, New Frontiers being a group of apostles together on mission, is we want to be accountable. We don't want to become isolated and accountable. And so we've taken steps to invite accountability. And so we looked at Dave Holden. That's one of the reasons he's here. That I want to be, and my team want to be, we want to be accountable. If Dave come in, we want to make sure we're not going off the reservation. By the same token, Dave has asked me if him and his team, if we couldn't be accountable to me as well. And so we're getting into each other's world. Now, what that means is, and Dave has had a big influence on us here in the United States from our very beginning, certainly a major influence on Jubilee at our very beginning. And in some ways, our churches are like sister churches. They've grown together and experienced some same things together. We feel a real connection with New Community Church and Dave, and he feels the same with us. So if you could get on an airplane, fly over and see Dave and New Ground, see something they're doing, visit one of their fasting and prayer days or one of those things, I think it could be helpful.
I don't want to record.
Is that hard?
And it's too long.
Okay. Carl.
What?
All right.
Carl's telling me to
get this book. Battle for the money. Just keep because you need it.
Okay.
All right, guys. Let's all thank John and Dave with a silent wave.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate your time, and yeah, lots to think about. So, yeah, everybody. Oh.
I think we're done.
We're being applauded. We're still alive. We done?
Done. We're done. Thank you so much.